excited to welcome you here today. My name is Madeline Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Common Grain Alliance. For those of you who are new to CGA, we're a membership-based organization that connects grain producers, grain processors, and end users of grain to build a more regenerative, equitable, and integrated regional grain economy in the Mid-Atlantic. I want to open this conference today by acknowledging that we're gathered here today on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway, Nacotchtank, and Anacostan people who have stewarded this land for countless generations. As we spend the day discussing the vital work of rebuilding a regenerative and equitable grain economy, it is crucial to recognize the historical injustices committed against Indigenous peoples and their lands. Our work to revitalize our regional food system is linked to a much larger process of reconciliation, restoration, and healing, which includes respecting and upholding the rights of Indigenous peoples and embracing their traditional knowledge and wisdom. There's so much else I want to say to kick off this conference, but I only have a few minutes and we have some amazing keynote speakers, so I will leave that to them. And the other point I want to emphasize as we get started is that today is about much more than just farming, milling, malting, bread, beer, and distilling. Regional grain networks like ours are popping up all around the country and all around the world, and they're rooted in a desire to reclaim our regional food systems, provide more nutritious food, support local farmers, and preserve traditional grain varieties. We are connected to a much broader movement towards reclaiming our regional grain systems, and we have peer organizations in the Northeast, in the Midwest, the West Coast, and all around the globe. And if you choose to attend the Community Grain Globally panel discussion during session 1, we have some amazing panelists who will speak about grain movements that are happening across the world, from the UK all the way to the country of Georgia. And it's wonderful that we have this broader community of people because there's a lot of work that we have to do. To rebuild our regional food systems, we need research about how to reintegrate heritage grain varieties. We need to invest in redeveloping and expanding grain processing and transportation infrastructure. We need education so that bakers, brewers, and distillers know what to expect from the products that are produced by regional grain farmers. And we need the public to understand the benefits of these products and to demand them from the marketplace. Everyone along the grain value chain needs to be in touch and in collaboration, and that's what CGA was established to do, and that's what we hope to accomplish with this conference. So I hope that you build some new relationships today, that you learn some new things that support your work and your business, and that you also have some fun, because we have a really amazing lineup of speakers and classes that we hope will enrich the work that you're doing and the work that we're all doing together to build a stronger regional grain value chain. So before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping notes for all of you. The bathrooms and the water fountains are in the hallway as you exit the elevators in that main lobby space. Most of the sessions today are on this floor around this space, but there are some sessions that are in room 313 on the floor above us. So if you exit the elevator bank on the 3rd floor, you should see some signs directing you to that classroom. And the majority of the sessions today are going to be recorded by a professional videography team, which you may have noticed here in this room, and you'll notice in the other classrooms. We expect that the videos of the different conference sessions will be uploaded to CGA's website in early 2024. So the great news is that if you miss a session, you'll be able to catch up on that after the conference, and this will help us achieve our mission of creating accessible and relevant education and training resources for the Mid-Atlantic grain practitioners. You should have each received a survey when you checked in at the registration desk this morning, and I just wanted to put in a plug for you to fill those out. I hope that you will take the time to do so. We will use that input to inform Common Grain Alliance's 2024 action plan. We really want to hear from you about how CGA can best serve you and your needs within the next year. And if you turn your surveys into the registration table by 3:30, we're going to be raffling off a copy of Jennifer Lapidus's book, Southern Ground, at the reception. So you want this book, trust me, and we want your feedback. So please fill those out and return them to the reception table. And finally, I just want to acknowledge our partners and our sponsors who made this event possible. This is really a community event. Hopefully you get that feeling as you sit at these long tables together and cozy up next to your neighbors. We're a little tight in here, but hopefully that helps you get to know each other and form some new connections. To the Philadelphia Grain and Malt Symposium team and the Craft Chatham team, they have been amazing partners in sharing their knowledge and expertise about how to pull an event like this off. If any of you attended the grain fair yesterday, it was a beautiful celebration of regional grains that we co-hosted with the Friends of Pierce Mill. And I want to send out a special thank you to Angela Kramer here, who's the executive director of Pierce Mill and a permitting and map maker extraordinaire, an all-around amazing human. That event truly would not have been possible without her. Also want to send, we had over 2,000 people attend the grain fair yesterday also. So that was a huge accomplishment and a beautiful kind of celebration and opportunity to bring the public into what we're doing here today as a community. Also want to send a special thank you to Steve Dryden. I don't know where he is in the room, but maybe he can raise his hand. He's not here, I guess, in the room right now, but if you see him out in the hallway or throughout the conference, he helped broker some of the original connections with UDC that made this conference possible. So thank him if you see him in the hallway. Thank you to Edible Blue Ridge, Murphy and Rude Malting, and Deer Creek Malt House, who all provided sponsorships. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to enjoy the great food and beverages that we have throughout the conference today. Hopefully some of you got some pastries from Selu. We expect the food throughout the day to be equally as amazing because it's all provided by CGA members. Lastly, thank you to Terry Mertz, Valerie Lewis-Taylor, Derek Morgan, and the whole UDC Causes and UDC Events team for helping us pull off this amazing event. So if we can have a round of applause for all of those individuals and organizations. We are so thankful to be hosted for this conference by UDC Causes, and so now I'll turn it over to Dean Dwayne Jones, who will welcome us and say a few words about the college.
Good morning, everyone. I want to say welcome to the University of the District of Columbia. We're happy to have you here. My name's Dwayne Jones. I'm the Dean of the College of Agriculture, Urban Sustainability, and Environmental Sciences, Causes, here at the University of the District of Columbia. We're a very unique college. We are the most recently formed college here at the university. We're about 11 years old, and we are the College of Ag in and for the nation's capital. How many of you knew we had a College of Ag in DC? Like 4 of you, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, the number's increasing. But yes, we have a College of Ag in DC, and we're actually #1. We are the #1 College of Urban Agriculture. And so I hope you have an opportunity to tour the campus. We have a food-producing green roof. We have developed and pioneered an innovative urban food hub system that put us 4th in the nation for land-grant universities for innovation and agriculture. Just recently, we won the #1 award for regional youth development in agriculture. And so we were happy to partner. Oh, thank you. Thank you. And so we were happy to partner with Madeline and the team. They've been very excited about this. We've been communicating for about a year now, I suppose, about this event. And so we're happy that you all are here. We're happy that this is the first ever. So this is historical, and we ask you to take pictures and share them with us. And we look forward to a long and continuing partnership in the future. And I want to say thank you to the Causes team, Causes, Amy, and others, and UDC, if you raise your hand, give them an applause. Thank you. And so please take some time and enjoy the district, enjoy the campus, and I hope to interact with you all throughout the day and throughout the remainder of the conference. So thank you, Madeline, and looking forward to working with you.
So it's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Jennifer Lapidus. Stand up here. Jennifer Lapidus is the founder of Carolina Ground, a regional flour mill located in Henderson, North Carolina. From 1994 to 2008, Jennifer was the owner, operator, and baker of Natural Bridge Bakery, one of the first wood-fired brick oven bakeries in Western North Carolina, milling in-house and producing whole grain, naturally leavened breads. With Carolina Ground, Jennifer stands between the farmer and the baker, seeking to understand the challenges of both while transforming regionally grown grains into high-quality whole grain and sifted stone-cooled milled flours. Jennifer's book, Southern Ground: Reclaiming Flavor Through Stone-Milled Flour, was published in 2021 by 10 Speed Press. Please welcome Jennifer with a round of applause.
And I want to thank all of you at the Common Grains Alliance. And Heather Coiner, if you're out there. Well, I know you're out there. Of course, you're out there. I used to sell flour to Heather, and and I knew she had this vision. So it's just so exciting to see it come to fruition.
Also, all the other people who were in the radio library, there were 13 of us. It wasn't just you.
Yeah. No. Definitely. I just knew. Yeah. This is an amazing organization, and I'm thrilled to be here. Give me a second, please. Okay, we can hear me? Okay.
Yes.
In the spring of 2008, I received a package at my bakery from the USDA Agricultural Research Service. This package contained hard red and hard white winter wheat, which had been grown in North Carolina. The grain was sent to my bakery because my millwright friend, Roger Jansen, then in his late 70s, had noticed the summer before plots of wheat growing at the research station in Salisbury, near where his son lives. Roger approached the staff at the station and learned that these plots of wheat were part of the Uniform Bread Wheat Trials, a breeding program that since 2002 had been breeding varieties of hard wheat, aka bread wheat, that could grow in the eastern United States. Roger provided the staff at the research station with my address and asked that they send samples to my bakery. Roger had become interested in all things grain related at least 50 years before, when he first read Henry Miller's essay, The Staff of Life, which begins, "Bread, prime symbol. Try and find a good loaf. You can travel 50,000 miles in America without once tasting a piece of good bread. Americans don't care about good bread. They're dying of inanition, but they go on eating bread without substance, bread without flavor, bread without vitamins, bread without life." Roger would become an elementary school teacher, but one day, sorry, I didn't expect to have a microphone right here, and I'm like, I'm gonna try this again. Roger would become an elementary school teacher, but one day he noticed in his food co-op in Montpelier, Vermont, a small meadows mill. Recalling Henry Miller's words, Roger understood the value of fresh flour. He eventually retired from teaching and moved down to North Carolina, where he got a job at Meadows Mills, learned to cut stone, and then began building his own mills with his two sons in the shop behind his house. This is how I would meet Roger, as he and his sons built the mills for my little bakery tucked in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Now, receiving a box of grain from the United States Department of Agriculture seemed unreal to me at the time. I imagine Roger had pitched my bakery as some large-scale production facility so big that we milled our own flour. This is the lens that I viewed the USDA through at the time, beholden only to industrial agriculture and industrial food producers. Even still, we milled the flour, and to my amazement, lovely bread was made with this North Carolina grain. Remember, this was 15 years ago? Although I had a few bakers, friends out in California working with local grain, I never imagined I could actually do this in North Carolina. My mind started ticking. And then a few weeks later, I received an invitation to a bread wheat field day at the Mountain Research Station in Waynesville, which is in the western part of the state. The event was being put on by the USDA and the North Carolina State University and was titled Bread Wheat and Organic Production. Incredible. Arriving at the field day, I quickly spotted people I knew and realized that invitations had been sent out to all the bakeries in Western North Carolina. These were my people. Since 2004, we've been coming together for the Asheville Bread Festival. Although at that first festival, I remember we were all a little nervous to meet our competition, but then we actually started talking and realized that it just felt like this exciting coming together of bakers. We considered each other friends. That we were all gathered in a field in Waynesville, though, was exceptional because it is not easy to get a baker out of the bakery, but this was 2008 and something really strange was unfolding in our world. The price of wheat had increased dramatically over the last few months, and although I was milling my flour in-house, I heard from baker friends that the quality of their flour had been especially unpredictable. It was becoming painfully clear how disconnected we all were from our most essential ingredient. The Mountain Research Station provided a stunning backdrop for a field day. Numerous small plots of wheat formed a patchwork of variety and color, framed by mountains in the background. We would learn that this is where the elite stock, the varieties of wheat that had made the cut, were being grown. Public breeder Dr. David Marshall, lead breeder of the uniform bread wheat trials, provided us with the backstory that in 2001, when he moved over from Texas A&M to North Carolina, a miller from Bay State in Morrisville, North Carolina, asked him if he thought bread wheat could ever grow in this part of the country. Food security and fuel prices were of real concern. And so began this project, all traditional natural breeding practices, trials being grown as far south as the Panhandle of Florida, west to Kentucky, north to Maryland, and a partnership with New Zealand, which enabled 2 crops a year. After Dr. Marshall spoke, agronomists from North Carolina State University and from the North Carolina Department of Agriculture provided agronomic information as well as beneficial crop rotations and potential diseases to be aware of. And then a representative from a very large bakery spoke. This was more of a manufacturing plant than a bakery. They produced the sub rolls for Quiznos and bread for IHOP and Red Robin. They had 3 locations in the United States, one of which was in Mount Airy, North Carolina. My heart dropped. It had all seemed too good to be true, but here was the real buyer. Why were any of us small bakeries even there? And then, a week later, I spotted an article on my Google alert for wheat entitled, "Bakery Workers Abruptly Let Go." All 3 locations, Colorado, California, and Mount Airy, North Carolina, were shuttered. I couldn't believe it. And this was the moment. I knew if we did not step forward, this opportunity might get swallowed up by another really big fish. And so I wrote a proposal. I had this idea because a few years before I had reached out to an organic grower in North Dakota to see if I could work directly with him. And he said he'd be happy to sell me grain if I could take a truckload, 40,000 pounds. Needless to say, I was way too small. But this idea of bringing all of us bakers together to become a buyer suddenly seemed possible. Now, I want to back up a bit to the history of big ag and food policy in this country because I think it's important to understand how we got here. And if everyone already knows this, maybe just repeating this here with all of us gathered is of value. Since the early 20th century, industrialization had developed at a fairly steady clip in this country, the industrial roller mill being one benchmark. But it wasn't until the early 60s that programs were put in place that would truly transform the agricultural landscape of this country. And these programs and policies were driven, no surprise, by big manufacturers. In 1962, during the Kennedy administration, the Committee for Economic Development created an agricultural subcommittee, which was made up of industry leaders, including representatives from Standard Oil, Ford Motor Company, Scott Paper Company, American Electric Company, American Gas Company, Heinz, Sears, as well as the Encyclopedia Britannica and Book of the Month Club, which I just had to add to this list. When I saw them, I was like, really? Like, why were they even there? But they were. This committee published their recommendations in a 60-page document titled The Adaptive Program for Agriculture, which begins, rapid technological advances and increasing capital investments have made it possible for fewer and fewer American farmers to supply the food and fiber needs of larger and larger numbers of people. American farmers have shown great initiative and competence in responding to the opportunities thus created. They have taken up the latest production methods with a speed that it amazes the administrators of agriculture in planned economies. This program and the first modern farm bill, which was passed in 1965, pushed forward the industrialization of agriculture and food policy through intentional directives to cut the family farm, moving bodies off the farm and into urban workforces, as well as the eventual consolidation of farms, monoculture, and with the end goal of the commodification of agriculture and the industrialization of our food supply. I know you all know this, but sometimes it helps to hear it. Farmer extraordinaire Bob Quinn really captures it in his book Grain by Grain, where he states the primary role of production agriculture in such an economy would be to produce inexpensive raw materials for urban food producers, food processors. These processors would produce cheap food for the laboring masses needed to work in urban factories, whose ranks would be recruited from the surplus rural population. And Henry Miller saw it years before. The care and affection which we once bestowed on the human body now goes to machines. Machines get the best food, the best attention. Machines are expensive, human lives are cheap. How natural then that the staff of life should be utterly without value. So there we were in 2008, on the verge of economic collapse, the spike in the price of wheat having little to do with what was happening on the farm and a lot to do with monetary fund policies that enabled hedging upon hedging of our most essential ingredient. And although I may have had justifiable mistrust for certain institutions, I recognized that there are humans that actually work for these institutions, and relationships can be formed with humans, which is what I began to do. I reached out to Dr. Marshall's assistant, Myron Fountain, who had sent the grain to my bakery, and Myron was quick to respond and receptive. He organized a meeting back at the research station in Waynesville and invited an extension agent, Molly Hamilton, to join us. I shared my ideas and my proposal, and Molly then shared my proposal with the director of the nonprofit Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, great organization as well, who reached out to me and said that he'd like to seek out grant funding to lay the groundwork for a regional grains economy and bring me on as to lead this project. We got funding on the day Obama was elected in November 2008, and by 2012, Carolina Ground, a mill that would connect the farmer, miller, and baker in the South, was born. Now, I'd like to list all the ways Carolina Ground has been able to succeed, which differs profoundly from the normal drivers of business based in competition and scale. From our very beginning, our two key drivers have been creativity and collaboration. From our very beginnings, we as bakers had each other. We pulled our chairs into a circle and imagined what it would be like to revive the community mill. We pulled in the community to help fund this effort. Grant funds, slow money, crowdfunding, and empathetic investors got us off the ground. I love the concept of empathetic investors. For us, these were accredited investors who chose to invest in us for a different kind of return on their money. They wanted to shape the community that they wanted to live in. For the mill, we of course chose stone over steel to process our grain into flour as flavor and quality matters. And once Carolina Ground was finally off the ground as a for-profit business, though it would take us a while to actually realize a profit, creativity and collaboration would guide my decisions. My trusted home bank had no interest in extending us any credit. But after our first year of milling, I had a couple observations. Cash flow is an issue for both the farmer and the miller, and grain stored over winter in a grain bin on farm in the South is highly susceptible to bug damage. So I approached our grower and I asked if he'd let me take the entire crop at harvest and pay him for it slowly over the next 6 to 8 months. He would sustain no loss from bug damage and we could both manage our cash flow. He said yes. And because he said yes, the next farmer I brought on trusted me because I had proved to the first farmer that I was worth trusting. And by the way, I now am able to pay the growers, if not completely at harvest, at least before the end of the fiscal year. Infrastructure. This is a hard one. Before GMOs, there were many seed cleaning operations throughout North Carolina, enabling farmers to save their seed. And this is the same infrastructure used for grain cleaning. We found one in the entire state. It worked well for a while as I tried to identify growers within hopefully no more than an hour's drive to the cleaner. My agreement with the farmer was that they haul to the cleaner and I would take the clean grain from there. Most of our seed comes from North Carolina Foundation seed producers located on the other side of the state. I got to know the folks at Foundation Seed as I realized that they didn't really know much about these hard wheats that they were selling, so I helped fill in the gap between Dr. Marshall providing the seed and Foundation, who is the entity growing out the seed to sell. I convinced them that there would be a market for this seed, so they should grow out a sufficient amount. Eventually, they started recommending organic growers that they thought I might want to work with. So I started working with growers located down the road from Foundation Seed, and the growers didn't want to haul their grain all the way to my seed cleaners. So they asked the folks at Foundation Seed if they would start cleaning for us, and they said yes. This has been huge, as they have really nice equipment. I stayed closely connected with Dr. David Marshall because most wheat processed in the United States is done by industrial roller mills, which strips away the oily, flavorful, nutrient-rich germ as well as the bran. In its goal of efficiently producing shelf-stable functional flour, most wheat breeders focus simply on performance in the bakery as well as, of course, disease and pest resistance and yield on farm. The question of flavor did not present itself until we began stone milling. But Dr. Marshall took an interest in our work, and we began coming together annually to assess flavor of his promising varieties. Myron would send me a few different varieties of grain, which we would mill and send out to a couple bakers. And then we would all come together to taste. Ideally, Dr. Marshall's quantifiably highest performing varieties aligned with the most flavorful. Our bakers have also helped us assess our grain at harvest through bake tests. Who better to tell us if a crop is good enough than the baker who will be using that crop. We all share information on best hydration, fermentation times, etc. As French master baker Lionel Vatinet of La Farm Bakery, who we've been working with since our beginnings, asserts, don't blame your ingredient. And the miller. For a long time, my focus had been on the farmer and the baker. I had a lot of creative solutions in the mill room, inspired by a lack of capital as I sought to achieve some semblance of efficiency. But the reality was, for a really, really long time, the job of miller was really hard. There was a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of dust. But the sustainability of the job of miller is crucial. I'm going to repeat that sentence because I really feel strongly about it. The sustainability of this job of miller is crucial. My focus finally shifted as I observed one bright-eyed unicorn of a miller. She was so inspired to dive in. But I watched her bright light dim as the actual work of milling in our space, plagued with inefficiencies, exhausted her to the bone. We were in a 1,700 square foot windowless space with milling into 8-gallon buckets. We would flip these buckets over. I can still feel it in my back. When our lease was running out, I knew decisions needed to be made. This was not sustainable for our body, mind, or spirit. I either needed to find a space that felt life-affirming, that would enable us to do this in a way that was truly sustainable, or it was time to close up shop. Amazingly, we found the building. Huge windows, 20-foot ceilings, the ability to interface with the public, and with an incredibly low interest rate loan from the SBA, thanks for the Coronavirus CARES Act, we were able to upgrade our system. Though instead of scaling up our business with this move, I focused on efficiency and was able to transform the job of miller from a 12-hour, exhausting day to an 8-hour shift that feels like a good day's work. When I first began laying the groundwork of Carolina Ground, I should pause for a minute, because that was a big deal. Moving into a space that enabled us to do this in a way that made sense, it was everything. And I was very hesitant to take on loans in the beginning. I mean, this was an idea that really hadn't proven, I mean, as we'll see in our panel when Evrim can begin, of what did it look like in the early days, it was really scary not that a bank was really jumping out to give me money, but to even consider taking out a big loan with a scary interest rate. And we were really lucky. But I think that role of, how do we do what we do? Because my back still hurts from those years. And there's only so much that a vision can take you when we start getting just sort of worn out by the actual work in front of us. Anyway, so when I first began laying the groundwork for what would become Carolina Ground, I reached out to a miller in Kansas to ask for his advice. He wrote me an email that began, "You have chosen to get involved in one of the most difficult projects in American agriculture." And I can affirm that this many years in, it is not without incredible challenges. Like, I could have listed insane things that we've gone through. we don't have enough time. But I have met the most amazing people along the way, all over this country. Like my friends up in New York, Tor Oshner, oh my gosh, Amy Halloran, June Russell, in Maine, Amber Lamke, I mean, the folks at Jeff at Hayden Flour Mill, Nan, I mean, Andrea, I just met at Ground Up Grain, all over this country. And Canada, England, New Zealand, Denmark, and even India, the collaborative spirit and generosity amongst those working toward rebuilding a grains-based sustainable food system is no less than inspiring. It is about more than food. Yes, it's about reclaiming ingredients and flavor and nutrients, but transcending all of this, it's about relationships and quality of life and creative thinking, which I believe is the very opposite of what the industrial leaders acting as the administrators of agriculture and planned economies had in mind. Thank you. Now I can introduce my panel, and thank you for going along with me on this, because I clearly don't just rote reading from something, but I really wanted to get you some details that is more than concept, but and I needed to read for that. But anyways, excited that we're moving on to a panel that really hones in on these key relationships. So Evrim and Gabriel and Charlie and Fred, come on up. Song and dance on your way. It doesn't, I mean, I'm going to start with you, but it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I get to sit next to the celebrity.
Okay. All right. So I'm really excited to get to moderate this panel of key players in your Mid-Atlantic grain chain here. I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves, but this group, yeah, I'm I have nothing to say, I have everything to say. Each of these businesses is based in a different facet of the grain chain. From the farm end, Fred, who I just got to meet in person, I'm so thrilled, and Charlie with Deep Roots Milling, and then Evrim, who's baking, and Gabriel, who's making pasta, and they're both milling in-house. So, but the thing is, I came on, you could hear sort of the story of Carolina Ground. We came on pretty early, but one of the first bakers I met was Evrim, and who was really, I think, well, I'm gonna let Evrim introduce himself, but I wanna let everyone introduce themselves in kind of to follow the timeline of this. So we're gonna start with Evrim and then to Fred and Charlie and Gabriel. So.
Good morning, everybody. Wow, that's right. Is that good? Can we take down the bass just a little bit? No, just kidding. Good morning, everybody. My name is Evrim Dogu. I'm one of the owners. My sister and I run a bakery in Richmond, Virginia. We opened in 2012, but I started baking bread with a friend of mine and bringing it in a hatchback to a farmer's market in 2009. And that's, I think, when we met. I reached out to then baker, now miller, Dave Bauer, Farm and Sparrow in Asheville. And I definitely had a moment where oh, this is a long introduction. Is this the introduction? Yeah, okay. This is why I have a mill. But I tasted Dave's bread. It was made from turkey red wheat. It was grown in Kansas, but it was the first bread I had that was just made from freshly milled flour. And I think a mutual friend, Antoine, was there, And we just looked at each other. It was quietly, baking in the morning. He threw us the bread. We ripped it in half. And I don't know what the beep. We looked at each other like that. Well, now I'm gonna have to do this. So at first we looked around Virginia to see where we could find locally milled grain, and we found a mill that was in Wade's mill, which will come back up in the genealogy here. But basically, that was where we fell in love with the romance of it. So I really owe. I remember it was called the organic. You had the longest name on a blog spot ever. What was it?
Organic Bread Flour Project?
Yeah, North Carolina Organic Bread Flour Project. .blogspot.com. So
That's true.
yeah, that's that. I found that website and I was like, okay, wow, this is actually happening. Yeah, strange to think that was 15 years ago. And so it is amazing to actually hear the fullness of that story and how it came about, because it definitely with you and what Dave was doing, it inspired a lot of when you see somebody else do it, then you're like, oh, maybe I can do it. Now I can curse and say, like, why did you inspire us to do something so difficult? So anyway, my sister and I run a bakery where we do mill our own flour, and we continue to be inspired by really other bakers, millers, and farmers that we meet. So like the main thing that we'll be talking about, the main thing that we'll be talking about is our relationships, but it is absolutely the essential to the reason we do what we do on the day we do it, and then how we're going to do it the next week. This has been the continual story for me, meeting Andrew Hain and Jonathan from Selu and many people in this room that continue to inspire me. So that's what we do now, and I can go more into that later. But Fred's one of the main people that we get grain from.
Good morning. I'm Fred Sachs. I'm here this morning with my son David. We are a organic farm on the northern neck of Virginia, which is about 80 miles down the Potomac River. And we started as a family weekend getaway. We have two teenage boys that were living with us in Old Town Alexandria. We needed a place for us to kind of stretch their legs. We didn't get out of the city on the weekends, so to speak. And we developed this concept that we could do some farming, be the woods, energetic things on the weekend, which slowly led to us leasing some farmland to a conventional farmer. And we realized how destructive the conventional farmer was to the environment. And the area in which we moved, we built a house and started this project where we were developing grains with the idea we wanted to be sustainable stewards of the land. That because the area where we are in the northern neck is an area that was, well, we know it goes back to primitive times because we found arrowheads throughout the property. And we think that being right there in the Potomac River, the area where we are, it is such a long history that we realize that there, after us, will be a long history of people also working that land. We decided to do grains because in our neck of the woods, so to speak, the people were doing corn, wheat, and beans, and we started doing wheat and beans, and began to focus on doing primarily Virginia-grown, Virginia-ground grains that weren't. Some of them are being developed by Virginia Tech, and in the microclimate where we are along the Potomac, it isn't possible for us to grow the grains that are going to compete with those from western United States. what we found with a careful attention to detail and constant working in the fields, we're able to develop products that perform rather well. And one of our first customers, and one of the ones we're most grateful to have as a customer, is Evrim and his family of bakers at Selu. I'm sorry, at Rosa. The goal for us at Grapewood Farm is to continue to grow a quality product that will be available to the general public here in the Mid-Atlantic. And yes, at yesterday's grain fair, we were pleased to meet countless people and introduce them to the grains and the processes of grains and identifying where flour comes from. And I think that's part of the thrust behind the Common Grain Alliance, is to build that awareness to the grains, which we're pleased to be part of that process. Thank you.
Well, I'm Charlie Way with Deep Roots Milling. We operate a historic water mill over in Nelson County called Woodson's Mill, not too dissimilar from Pierce Mill that we saw yesterday. But yeah, talking about the genesis of Deep Roots Milling, I guess kind of everyone alluded to, our family has a long history in the milling business. We operated Wade's Mill from, I guess, 1880 to 1990, going back 6 generations. So the mill was always a big focal point of my life growing up, and I always had this interest to get back into it. So in 2018, I bought a little 8-inch stone mill, Meadows Mill, started milling in our garage in Roanoke, did a farmer's market, sold a little bit to a bakery, and kind of just started out there. And then that was kind of right around the same time the CGA was getting up and going. So I was able to network with growers and buyers there and expanded a bit. Moved up to a 16-inch mill, a little bit bigger production, but still very, very small scale. And right around 2020, it got to the point where the garage was just not big enough anymore. So we had to find another solution. At that point, connected with the Brockenbrawl family that owned Woodson's Mill, and found out that they were interested in selling the property and kind of stepping aside. So at that point, we took the opportunity to go down there on weekends, help out, kind of learn that operation, which led to a lease of the mill building from the new owners of the property. And then I connected with Aaron Grigsby, who was running a restaurant in Blacksburg and was a customer of our flour at that point, to see if he wanted to help out with this operation. And Aaron's a pretty competent baker, great work ethic, and I thought we'd be able to partner up on this and work well together. And then Aaron had a friend, Ian Gamble, who's now part of the operation. He and Aaron were making pizza ovens together. And so all three of us kind of got together and we formed what is now Deep Roots Milling. Yeah, so we've been at Woodson's Mill since 2020. We do kind of still somewhat of a part-time operation. We kind of joke around, it's more than a part-time operation, but not quite a full-time operation, but it works with our schedules at this point. Yeah, we do a lot of wholesale. The bakeries, Charlottesville, Richmond, DC, Virginia Beach are kind of our big distribution areas. Yeah, and looking ahead, we're continuing to build out capacity at Woodson's. We're also looking at building out some milling infrastructure on Daniel Austin's farm in Franklin County to supplement our work at Woodson's.
So my name is Gabriel Key. I am the miller, maker, like everybody else, doer of all things at Foggy Mountain Pasta, and we have a sister name as well, Foggy Mountain Milling, because that represents some of the changes we've taken on. I have the weird claim of fame in that I randomly called up Jennifer when I was living in Boone, North Carolina in 2017, and I was like, I want to do this thing with pasta. Can I use your flour? And Jennifer was kind of like, what? Because I think I was kind of like, I want to do this with pasta. I want to do better. That's kind of our whole goal with Foggy Mountain Pasta and Milling, which is like, just do better. And not with a lot of extra stuff, just do better. Get better grain and get out of the way. I'm actually a classically trained, as in I trained in Paris, France, chef. And that is kind of my core belief, right? It's to find the best thing and get out of the way. And I've carried that through my life, through lots of different things. And now I carry it forward with me with Foggy Mountain Pasta and Foggy Mountain Milling. We are based out in Chantilly currently. We have to move soon, so that's kind of daunting. And we started milling, and it wasn't because I had a frustration with poor quality of flour. In fact, it was more that I wanted to expand our mission, which is to buy more direct from farmers and then bring it back into the pasta and or get it to more people. That's always kind of been our goal when we started up in the mountains of North Carolina, and then we moved back up here to the DC area. It's always been our goal, which is to get the best that we make to the people. I mean, that sounds a bit radical, but that's kind of always been our driving goal. And so we started taking on the goal of milling because we kind of just felt like, especially after all the whiplash of COVID, was like, great, we can reach out, we can do a little bit more by reaching out and buying from farmers, and then hopefully we can grow things and then be able to bridge more between farmers and millers and then producers and consumers. And I may be one of the few people that so we buy our grain, and then we also sell direct to restaurants, we sell to the public, so we carry lots of different threads at the same time. And it's kind of an interesting challenge a lot of times when you get to people, especially at farmers markets, and they look at your product and they're like, but it's brown. And you have to be like, yeah, and it's really good too. And so it's been really interesting to deal with that over time. So, and I'm really honored to be a part of this panel today. These are 4 people that I get a lot of inspiration from. And I really wouldn't be sitting here without any of these 4 people and many of you out there.
Thank you for ending with that note, because that is the thing. It's like the biggest piece in all of this for us is, I think, relationships. And Fred, like, my understanding is that Evrim was your first customer, and Evrim's sister is the one who approached you. And I would love for the both of you, or starting with Fred, to kind of reflect on that. On what happened there, how it sort of, set you out onto the journey.
I'm gonna trust your memory.
You don't know how scared we were. We remember you don't know us personally, but we were beginning to grow this grain with the idea that we're going to have this. We had this vision of being able to supply grain to bakeries and be able to do home bakers as well. And we had a tractor, we had a combine, but we didn't have any means to clean the grain. And so we took, on the northern neck of Virginia, it's a peninsula, and we took our grain down the road, as they say, to a fellow who was cleaning it, and while he was cleaning it, there were pig carcasses hanging in his barn, and he puts it into bags for us and puts it on a pallet, and we load it on the truck. We get it back to our place. The bags are written in Chinese, and the bags these were leftover bags that they had used to clean from the cleaning process that they were involved with bagging fish meal from the Manhattan that was being exported to China. So we got an order to deliver to Evrim.
Nobody ate fish bread that night.
He's going to disassociate himself with this, but it was one of the kindest acts, because we show up with bags that are, we don't even know what it says on it because it's all in Chinese. So, and they're metric bags. So we're delivering 50 pounds of grain in a metric bag, which is floppy and uncomfortable to deal with. And
Yeah, this is why knowing Fred is amazing, because I don't remember it being special. I was like, oh, look, another bag of grain that we have to deal with today. And every time I met Fred thereafter, he greets me like I built his house or something. So I'm really thankful that you feel that way about me. But I, immediately was happy because I knew you were the first, one of the first. There's like 1 or 2 other farmers that was growing grain. I mean, probably one of the themes we'll hear a lot is it's hard to find growers that really are doing what you do. So yeah. So.
I appreciate that comment, but we had to clean our laundry after we made that delivery.
I would love to dig in a little deeper to that before we leave that, because you don't have to get into the nitty-gritty details, but I'm curious about the relationship in terms of where you sort of created that intersection between this is a crop and this is a food grade item, and like from you, Evrim, what you were able to receive, or from you, Fred, where you had, what was the end result in that?
When was that? Do you remember when that was? About what year?
Evrim, I had to bury that memory. But it had to be 2011 or 12. No,
yeah,
somewhere around.
2011. Yeah. Right when we started. Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that I can say about that I remember is I was so grateful that there was. It's like you receiving that grain in the mail. Like, okay, this is the holy grail, so to speak, or you think it is at that time, and then it disappears and there's another one on the horizon. But I was like, wow, this is really amazing that we have a farmer that's an hour and a half away
growing Chinese wheat.
Chinese wheat. How does he do it? And he delivers it to our doorstep, and we have this mill in the shed out back. Okay, let's do this. But I would say that I think a little bit. I won't say that blind leading the blind, but I feel like we were both feeling around in the dark a bit. And so I was very open with, if I was like, so is it normal for me to see this? And you were like, oh no, it is not. And so then I think that was the beginning of a good relationship, right? Communication. So I was just very open with what we could work with. And I remember even asking a person that I was friends with in the coffee industry, and I was like, so how do coffee people do it when they're, trying to decide what to buy, and it's a much different system, but they say that they have like a whole, metric of, rate it 1 to 10. And I feel like in a sense, we just in a very organic speaking sense, we just kind of talk to each other about it.
And it's interesting, in the conversation that I had with Evrim and his sister one day, David and I had been growing a winter cover crop with some VNS rye. VNS is just an unspecified variety of rye. And his sister said, well, if you're growing rye, would you grow some for us? Well, that conversation was really interesting for us because David and I kind of looked at each other and said, well, we can't grow VNS rye and ship it to Sub Rosa because we don't know what the hell it is. So that got us into trying to source Danko rye, which is a Polish variety, very common to some of the people in this room. And when we grew it one year, looked for another source to resource it the following year, and our supplier said we don't have any more. We stopped selling it, and that led us to source it, and that's how we met Thor Eschner in upstate New York, who is another grower, but far distant from here, not necessarily selling in this community, but certainly known in this community about being an outstanding person as well as an outstanding farmer. And like everyone on one side who is sharing the details on a conversational sort of friendship basis on how to use the use of the grains, Thor, on the other hand, would take long, detailed explanations into helping us think about, because remember, we're just beginning farmers. So Thor was telling us about various means to help us clean the crop in the field, and we should still use some of those principles today that are exceptional because we don't have that long history that either Charlie does or some of the other people do in both farming and milling. So it's the fraternity of this group of within the industry that has helped us learn more better, not really, but you know what I'm talking about, how to improve what we're doing. reach our intended goal, and how to reach out to others and be a source of information to them or for them about what we're doing and the mistakes that we've made. Because, you know, really, we have to make mistakes before we learn how. We have a saying that David's rolling his eyes because when we get a piece of equipment, there's a break-in period. Well, we understand what a break-in period is because we break things, you know, to test the theory. But it's the relationships that we've developed. And I look around the room and I see so many people here that I recognize, not necessarily for their individual faces, but for what they've taught me and us, and how I share the relationship. And I'm honored to be sitting with these people this morning because these people are leading the industry for us in this region. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. It's interesting because I don't want to fully interject myself into this, but what we have in the South looks different than what's up here. And you guys are really lucky, I think, because what you're starting with is like establishing roots at the, you know, you're establishing good practice at the very roots of your system. I stepped into a situation with growers that are already growing a commodity crop, and it's still 10, 11 years in, a long, slow conversation about shifting away from commodity mindset driving yield for a commodity market to food grade. I had a grower early on who we had set up seed cleaning infrastructure on farm, and which was a lesson learned, but I received a tote of grain and it had a dead frog in it. And I was like, there's a dead frog in my tote of grain. And the farmer's response was, what kind of frog? You know, which was like, maybe not what would happen in this situation, you know. And then he went on to like, what do you expect? This is from a farm, you know? And I was like, So, anyways, I didn't mention that in my talk. But that being said, I wanted to turn to Charlie because in regards to sourcing, because that's, I'm really curious, and I think all of us, to know how you manage and engage your relationships. Are you approaching growers, or are growers approaching you? How does this look at Deep Roots? And what have you learned? Like, what works, what doesn't work? You know, yeah.
Sure. I think we kind of have the opposite problem that you're having. We're trying to, year on year, we're trying to get growers to you know, put more grain in the ground, produce more, or increase their production, either, you know, put more acres in production. So when we first started out, you know, we were trying to be as hyper-local as possible, try to get everything from Virginia. And we kind of quickly realized that you know, that doesn't leave a lot of room for error. So we've since broadened we're trying to grain shed to the whole mid-Atlantic, which kind of correlates with our distribution area. So we're pulling a lot of grain from Virginia, but we also do pull stuff from Maryland and Pennsylvania. Yeah, at any given point, you know, we're working with 10 to 15 growers. Most of these are, you know, pretty small growers. So diversity in crop is pretty high. You know, one of the struggles that we deal with is just infrastructure. We don't have any cleaning infrastructure at the mill at this point, or any operational cleaning infrastructure. We don't have a lot of storage infrastructure. So we kind of rely on the farmers to do that. And to you know, a lot of farmers do have their own cleaning equipment, which sounds like it kind of differs from what you're seeing down in North Carolina. But yeah, and we kind of operate. We will, you know, get a couple thousand pounds every month, and then we generally process that as it comes into the mill and get it out the door. Then in our network of growers, a lot of it originated from CGA from those early days, and then that's kind of expanded as other growers connect with growers, and then a reference back to us. You know, I don't know if we actively search out new growers. It seems like it's word of mouth that just kind of spreads around that we're looking for certain grains, and and we make that connection with them. But yeah. Did I miss what else?
Yeah, I mean, that pretty much hits it. I was kind of curious, like, you know, have you kind of found like what does work and what doesn't work, or are you still kind of in that place of?
I think we're at a place where we're willing to work with anything. As long as it meets the quality, like the food grade standards, below minimum DON or maximum DON, no insect infestations. We're willing to work with the crop as long as we feel like we can create a good product from that, and that we can relate that to our baker customers and allow them to work with it. So, and we're still small enough where we have direct conversations with all our customers, and so as we're putting incorporating new grain into our mix, we can communicate that with everyone pretty easily and make sure that still works for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Evrim, when you were referring to the coffee industry, it's interesting, even if you reflect on the normal way that grain would be graded and priced. Like for us this year, we just paid a serious premium for some low quality grain, and I did so because I really didn't want to lose this grower, and I knew that his yields were terrible, and if I didn't make up for it, I was going to lose him. And because some farmers, at least in my neck of the woods, can have very short-term thinking, I had to remind him of the good years, because so it's a little inside out, upside down. But that idea of as long as it meets enough standard, when I said the crop is good enough. For us this year, I did a ton of bake testing to find my way through this grain, and then finally found it, which I was really excited about. But that piece of we are not mirroring what is going on in the Midwest. We are trying to figure out what works well in our region, and just that massive, as we invest in our soil, for me, it's like investing in our growers. I don't want to lose the traction. So that being said, a good transition over to and Evrim, I kind of want to keep that going, because I wanted to circle back to you to reflect on that question, Charlie, about how you're addressing growers, because you've been working with growers from the early on, and have you had years where the grain isn't working as you need it, and you've really had to fall back on your baker skills? How have you navigated that? And then,
everything Fred has ever grown is amazing. It's really actually easy for me to say that. Fred and David really do every time I see you guys, you have a new variety that you're growing. It's very high quality, it's organic, it's very clean, and you're always trying to, you're doing
Thank you.
Yeah. But
Say it again, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Look into the camera. Really, I mean, we've gotten grain from Minnesota. There's an organic mill up there. When things aren't, we're in the infancy here. When we first started, we got a lot of the backbone grain of a lot of our breads and pastries were from out west, from Kansas or from Minnesota mainly. Meeting Jonathan, who came from the bread lab over in Washington and then opened Selu here, I call them bread astronauts, which is what I used to refer to Dave Bauer as too. They're just kind of floating out there in space, and you're like, wow, it's really scary what you're doing out there. And they're like, yeah, we do it. And I'm like, well, that's scary. I'm gonna stay right here on Earth doing this thing. But that was really inspiring, and Jonathan's actually shared a lot of contacts with me. So I think I would say for anybody thinking about doing this, and this, I just want to kind of throw this chaos grenade into the room too, is that I feel like they're with farming, with milling, with, I'm gonna just say pasta making. I know nothing about it. With pasta making, with bread making, there's this, with all of us, there's this drive to take things on ourselves because we're so passionate about, we all have a very common vision, I believe, for where we want to go, but we're passionate about doing it, and we're like, okay, we're just gonna do it ourselves. But I think that actually puts the onus and the pressure of maintaining all that infrastructure, all of those efficiencies on each individual. I believe this is worse than a gluten allergy that we have in our society. It's like we have a collaboration allergy or a cooperation allergy, and I think it's in the air. It's in the zeitgeist of how we view what we're doing. We don't even see ourselves being like, oh, we have to be. It's just we think the individual way is the better way. When you look at coffee cooperatives, it's amazing, or dairy cooperatives in India, all these beautiful examples from around the world, and I think that we're getting started here. But I just want to say that, like, one of the things that I've noticed is the relationships have been key, the communication in those relationships has been key. There's not a person that's sitting up here that we haven't spoken for over, an hour on the phone at one time or another, or visited each other in our respective shops or farms. But there is, I feel like, we're in the inaugural state right here, infancy. So we're not even learning the language yet, maybe, of how to work together. I have 2 daughters, and they're just getting to that point, And so I feel like that ability for us to maybe start learning the language of how to cooperate so that we do make things more efficient for each other, that's what I would love to see appearing more. And one of the key ways in which I feel like, I'm just going to say I'm either lazy or selfish, or just I don't have enough time in my mind. I don't know how Jonathan does it, but I don't set aside the time to do the legwork, to go seek new farmers, to go connect new farmers, which is why the CGA, I think, is such a valuable organization. But I don't even go to the website, and I could. So there's things that I think we're trying to create to help smooth the way towards that, so that it is easier for anybody who wants to get involved to basically make those initial steps and not feel like, okay, I've got to do all this, I keep calling it legwork, but all of that nitty-gritty work to actually even get started. And I do want to say one more thing about that. Like, there's a sexiness and like a romanticism about that. Like, there is something, I saw you and Dave doing it in the early days, and I was like, oh, they're working themselves to the bone. I want to do that, Like, we have, I don't know, there's like, maybe I'm just revealing personal. There's like a sexiness to that, and then I was like, oh, this is not sexy. This is terrible, and and our backs hurt.
We glorify the work as a culture, right? And then you add the agricultural kind of like thing, and I think it's great. I think what you just said is perfect, though. I mean, I completely agree with you. And when we made the choice to get our mill, I battled with that for days. I remember calling you, and we had a very candid conversation. I was like, okay, but this is kind of my goal, and you were kind of like, well, if you want to do it, you can. And I caught the meaning of that. But what's interesting is I've gotten into the pasta world, I get that twofold. So the number of chefs that I've dealt with that are like, well, we make ours in-house. It's like, okay, great, Or I can get better from the importer, which is my favorite claim too, because I actually had many customers that have lived in Italy or from Italian, and they kind of secretly come up to me and they're like, yours is better. But they won't say it publicly. So I think actually we are facing a big challenge in multiple fractures. There is a fracturization happening. I see more and more people, like when I talk to Andrew, there's more and more people getting mills, but we're not necessarily working together as a group to build the relationships to overcome the obstacles of like safe and secure grain, so that when somebody's harvesting something up in, say, Loudoun County, where I'm trying to buy, and I'm trying to buy as much as I can within Loudoun County even, there's a problem with cold storage or lack thereof, right? And then how do we get the grain and hold it over winter? And Fred, you and I have talked about it. Cleaning equipment is another major problem. And then you have clusters of growers. Like you've got more density of growers down in the central southern part of the state than say up the northern part of the state. And it's not necessarily efficient for somebody to leave Winchester and drive down to Charlottesville with several hundred tons of grain and spend the day cleaning and then drive all the way back up because nobody has enough time. So I think these are all, we just hijacked your panel, I'm sorry. But I think that is a major problem that we all should be working to address. And it also requires us to admit that we're human, right? And just be like, I can only do what I can do, right? And if that means I have to work with 2 other people to kind of figure out how to get this done, that's what I'm gonna do. And I'm gonna steer this back now because I've benefited from that as with, like, just first with Jennifer. When I was in North Carolina, it was great to be able to call Jennifer up and I'd be like, so I just tested the flour and this is what happened. And Jennifer would be like, well, I'm a baker. These are my ideas. And I'd be like, okay, I'll run with that. So having the comfort to be able to ask the stupid questions, which you've all suffered from, thank you, but also the ability to kind of like, all right, I have this idea and we'll go for it. And so what I've been trying to do with the pasta business, when I've been reaching out to chefs, as I've introduced our flour to the chefs that are saying we make it in-house, is to say, well, great. If you want to buy the flour, come and ask me questions about how to do it, right? I'm happy to, I'm not going to give you my exact ratios because yours will be different, but I'm happy to get you really close and get you going on that. Because every chef that I've worked with for 20 plus years doesn't like being told what to do. So I found it really helpful to be like, I'll take you to the water and I'll even build a plank, but you got to decide what you want to do next. And so that's really helpful, I think. And that's part of that relationship management that we've been talking about. But at the same time, I turn back to my now farmers and millers and I'm like, okay, I just texted one of my farmers the other day and I was like, what's this in the grain? Like, why am I seeing this? And his response was, I'll get back to you, which was great. And it's good to be able to manage on both sides of that equation.
Yeah, and for you, you work with an extruder with your pasta, right? And probably most of your chefs are doing it by hand, right? But okay. I would think like what Gabriel's doing in conversing with his chefs, it's like that baker who's helping, these are the relationships that are so key. And when I had mentioned in my keynote that I had heard amongst bakers that their flour was especially unpredictable in that 2008 thing, there was a lot of, there was very little transparency with the mill to the baker back then. I mean, I had a miller that I was buying grain from Middle River, Minnesota, and he would tell me about the grain, and his prices didn't really move much. I noticed that because he had his growers right there. But kind of coming from fear and not being transparent, it really didn't help the situation, and it was an opportunity that was missed for those, for that miller or those millers that were kind of not wanting to say, which was going on was, I don't want to buy on this market, so I'm not doing the blending that I would have been doing, and so I'm sending out flour that's not the specs that I normally would because the price of wheat has gone up 130%, But back to you, Gabriel. I was curious about, I sort of said a little to Evrim on this, but like, I know with you have more wholesale business, and when I may be wrong on this, but like, are you selling on the store shelf or just
both?
Okay, because you have these signature pastas and a very clear like Virginia grown, on the box. So what are you doing when you how are you managing supply issues if you have a poor season, and then how do you address any of these little bumps when you can't? It's one thing like Wade, Charlie. I kind of want to call you Wade. Sorry, Charlie. When you're selling to a baker, or a chef, they're presenting to the public. But with, you and both of you have these customers that you're not seeing. So how do you navigate that, especially with this sort of eat it that this is going to be Virginia grown?
I don't sleep much. There's a degree at which you have to kind of acknowledge that you can take it, and then there's a point where you're like, okay, I can only manage to this point. We've had to teach certain people, certain chefs, like, true story, back when I was in North Carolina, I went to a Four Seasons, and I did a tasting with a chef, and he comes up to me, he's like, your pasta's da-da-da-da-da. I was like, can I taste it? And he said, sure. I was like, your pasta water's not salted. And he was like, no, sorry to say this. He was like, no fucking way. My team knows what the fuck they're supposed to do. I was like, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $100 of free pasta if I'm wrong. Go taste your water. Stomps back there. The next thing I hear this, how the hell could you do this? The guy's out front. Da, 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 da. He's like, can you come back in about 20 minutes and we'll do this over again? Because they got a fresh pot, new water, salted it. Suddenly, the chef's like, this is amazing pasta. So it takes the ability to have the courage sometimes that the customer's not always right. And our jobs, I think, are to educate the customer. One of the things that I, on that list of, I need to do it, but I never get there, is a lot of outreach, social media, marketing materials where we were like, this is what you need to do with the pasta. Like I've developed a script that every single one of my people that sell at farmers markets or will go to markets to train is 3 rules for awesome pasta. Lots of water, almost too much salt, use a timer. But I got to that point because I had to discern down how to boil it down, no pun intended, to 3 easy things that people can remember. Like it's like we had counted out the words. So to manage that outward relationship, we also had to figure out how to make it stupidly simple and how to make it so it's really kind of like sexy. Like 3 things, you can do it, and I empower you to do it. And that's actually fun to get to that point where you're like really, really empower. And I think there is a lot of territory that we can cover as an association with that empowerment aspect. When it comes with chefs, we do a lot of communication. We do a lot of communication with the bakeries and the chefs that we work with to say, hey, this is where the grain's coming, this is what's happening, there might be a slight change. And what we found is the customers that are really loyal to us are usually like, okay. They're like, sure, great, we'll work with it, no problem, right? It's the customers that were really hard to work with that are the ones that are often require the most kind of like justification, right? Like Fred had some grain that, some guy bought like what, 1/3 of your grain 2 years ago or something like that?
No.
So suddenly I was like, I built up a whole single variety pasta and we were gonna go forward with it, and all of a sudden it's like, it's not there, right? And so that took a pretty hard turn to figure out because, I built up customers to go for it. And so some of our clients were like, sure, okay, just switch the wheat, we trust it. Others were like, how could you do this? We built this thing. And you just kind of have to learn to swim hand in hand with those people. But it's also having the courage to turn back to the other side of that coin and be like, okay, hey, this grain doesn't seem to be working as well as it did last time. What's different, right? Why isn't this happening this time? This flour is a little bit different. Or when you guys were having issues with your sifters, it was just like, hey, I know you're doing the best you can do, but I can't use this flour the way it is because, like, especially with extrusion pasta, the difference between like an 80% extraction and an 85% extraction is the difference between me weeping on the floor with a dental pick for 5 hours and me going home at the end of 8 hours really happy, right? And that's less than 5% of extraction. So we're talking like microscopic differences in grain bran fleck, but that's the difference between getting stuck in the die and having a successful run. So I can go on. I get nervous and I repeat myself, so I apologize.
Yeah, so for us, some of our kind of our backbone products that we offer are bread flours. That's from a supplier. The grain comes from a supplier in Pennsylvania that we feel pretty confident that's going to have a consistent supply throughout the whole year. For other products that are coming from smaller growers, a more diverse set of growers, we clearly indicate that those are limited supply, and that if we do have any sort of change in grain throughout the year, we communicate that pretty openly with the customer base. And again, we're small enough where we can still communicate pretty easily with all our buyers. And as far as milling, Aaron and Ian do a great job at having a consistent milling session. They're constantly checking the flour coming off the mill to make sure it meets their specs. So the product that comes out of the mill is generally the same from session to session.
And I have a friend out in Berkeley, Morel's Breads, Eduardo Morel, who's been doing this for quite a while. Because he was one of my friends out in California that was able to work with local grain when I was still a baker. And he has this bread that's still his most popular bread that's just called his local loaf. And sometimes it's on the hearth and sometimes it's in the pan. But it really engages his customers because they all want to know what is it going to be depending on what grain he gets. And so I think that that there's this, these relationships that have had to continue to be cultivated and recast, kind of new paradigm shift in thinking from, maybe when we thought the system was working to like, ooh, let's get closer to an ingredient. It used to be that the baker would be like, ugh, this flour doesn't work, that mill sucks. Now we're, and there was just, no offense to us bakers, but there's a certain snobbery on the baker's end of like, they don't know what they're doing, or the flours or calling the mill like, I need to know exactly this is really funny because I'm now the miller here saying this. I'd be more comfortable being the baker saying this, but this sort of, I need to know the falling numbers in the protein, you know, and like I remember doing that. I remember like telling the guy I was buying from, I need to know this information. But from my perspective now, it's like, I'm not going to hand you some grain without knowing that information, you know, and all of us sort of trusting each other for that. Yeah, we're happy to share the information because it can be relevant, but for sure. But the big mills would, you know, they for the most part are blending to spec. They're adjusting their flours to have, you know, does everyone know what falling numbers are? Yes, no, do you want me to tell you? Okay. Falling numbers are basically a measure of the enzymatic activity that's going on in the flour. It also can show us if there's sprout damage, which is a really big you know, that can be a major problem for actually using the product for either pasta or for bread. But you know, it's that, and I'll tell you the test. It's this this tube, a glass sciencey thing, and they mill a sample of this and make a slurry. So the more viscous that slurry, the more intact starch there is, and they drop a stopper down and the amount of seconds it takes to fall. So if it's really viscous, it's going to fall slowly, and your falling numbers are going to be high. If it falls really directly, your starch is converted to sugar, you've got sprout damage, it's not going to work. But once you're in that window of it working, then it affects the baker in terms of what is the color of my crust, or, you know, I think it also, you know, it does affect fermentation, especially when you're working with autolyse and such. Evrim, you can check. I haven't been a baker in years enough, but that was my experience. Is you know, I see it. Like, you know, kind of enzymatic activity, protein, two things that.
Totally, yeah, and I don't know actually if we have a farmer in Pennsylvania who has really had consistent wheat the past couple of years, but this year really low falling number. So if anybody comes up to me and lets me know if you can use it or what you would do with like a super low falling number, really good hard red spring wheat, please see me later.
Yeah, it's interesting because we had some really lovely Virginia grown out white that had really low falling numbers, and it was sprout damage, and I really wanted to buy it because I baked with it, and I was like, oh, this is so interesting. But it was, what's going on is it's wanting to become a seed at that point. This is it is literally making that shift to be a seed, and so without mechanically stopping it, my understanding was it was going to keep going in that direction, so we just couldn't. That was my,
So I'll talk to you about that, farmer. So I actually just remembered a conversation, like one of the first times I called you, and you were like, this flour, you know, because you were asking about like, you know, most of the flour we make is really for bread. We've never really had anybody come up with for pasta. And I remember, and you reminded me of this, Jennifer came to me and she's like, we don't, you know, this may not be a good fit for you. And I was like, I'll make it work. And some of the bakers I sell to are flour, and some of the chefs that I trust a lot here have the same attitude. And I do think as much as those numbers, and the science is important, we all kind of need to cultivate, encourage, foster, and I really do believe those words profoundly. Like we almost need to dumb down the science, encourage the creativity. And what I mean by that is like, it's not like King Arthur flour is hard to find. So you could take maybe a flour that's got great flavor, but maybe slightly lower protein, maybe a lower number, and you could easily add in a little bit of a more stable, more higher protein flour and still get a product that meets your goals for a bread or for a pasta, but have it work. And so I think, I'm not trying to make it seem aristocratic or anything else, but I think one of the challenges we all face is, you know, as users, as growers, as millers, at all points in the change is how do we try to get home bakers to do it? Like how do we make it so it's not, how do we make it so it's like, it's okay to add this in. It's okay to use a little bit of a higher protein flour that you might have to bridge this gap. If you're making a pasta, maybe you need to increase a little bit more semolina on your next batch to get that tooth feel that you want because you've got more protein in there, right? And I think that's part of that relationship and just kind of going forward with it. And kind of, you know, when I have chefs call me up, I'm never adverse to it. I'm always like, okay, great, yeah, let's do this. But I'm also partly that way because of working with you and everybody over here. So I think there is a lot of we're all kind of stuck in the middle going back and forth. And you guys have tried to, I've sampled your flowers before, and there's a lot of questions of like, well, why does it work? I'm like, it's too much protein, right? Because for pasta, we have different protein needs, and it becomes dough inside the extruder, which is a lot of fun to work with. But it doesn't slide the way it needs to slide. So.
I remember having a conversation with Heather Corner at one point. I think we all get hopped up on stone ground products. I mean, an artisan loaf. I think that's intimidating to some folks. So I think the goal of the CGA, or at least my goal, is to see more just grain production in the region. So producing like commodity flour out of local grain, I think that's still a valuable thing. You got to meet people where they are, essentially.
And I think that another piece that I don't know if any of you experienced, but another piece that is, I just feel the value of interfacing with the public. I know you do farmers market. Do all of you interface? Yeah, of course you get the brick and mortar. Telling the story of what we do, I think, is really important, because another piece, even though the price had spiked in 2008 and it never fully came back down to what it ever was, it's more expensive to do what we do. And I was spending some time with my friend, Chicago area miller, Janie's Mill, Harold, and he told me about a really unfortunate thing that happened to him, which is so old school thinking. I mean, you hear these stories in like the natural food industry history, or like, why is Whole Foods owned by Amazon? I mean, that whole world of just kind of dog-eat-dog competition, which really leaves no room for creativity, and there was a distributor in a mill that basically undercut his business, went around to bakers and offered them flour at a cheaper. And he's telling me this story, and the bakers are like, I'm sorry, Harold, but just really couldn't, match the price, or we couldn't, and my reaction without thinking through anything was just like, shame on them. Like, those bakers are part of the story here. We need those bakers to help make this happen. It takes the customer at the end of the day to understand the value of what they're getting, the baker to believe in this rebuilding of the food system, the miller, or the baker, miller, pasta, miller, farmer, miller, all of us along the line, to really believe that we can do this and that there is greater value, yeah, I mean the nutrient. Yes, please.
No, I was just gonna say I actually have a difficulty with that part, maybe more than anything else, because when you're speaking with a farmer or a compatriot baker or another miller, you're behind the scenes. Sub Rosa has always had a difficult time marketing ourselves. Like, I think most people know we mill. Most people probably don't know that it's regional, which I'm so sorry. I would hide behind the chair if I could right now. So sorry, everybody. But this gets to my point, is a lot of times, you're slinging pastries, you're just trying to get by day-to-day business stuff. And I think a lot of maybe the relationship with the customer, the consumer, becomes the most faceless, because you can't physically speak to each person about, and even the marketing becomes so reductive too, that anyway, that's at least been our, I won't say excuse, but maybe the excuse in the back of our minds, the unconscious excuse, which is why we don't put a lot of energy into it, is it's really difficult to communicate that.
But which underscores the significance of what's going on here in Common Grains Alliance, because those of you that are in the trenches doing it, I mean, Flat Rock Village Bakery down the road from us, they use a ton of our flour all the time, and nobody would know because they're just so busy doing that, because we don't have what you guys have up here, which is so great.
Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant. Like, you walk into Selu and the mill's right there, and the bags of grain are right there, and that if you can have that kind of space, it's remarkable.
Right.
And we're gonna try to put pictures up, to indicate that we have that. But without having that visual reference, making that connection with people in some other way. And we've always thought like, okay, well they'll taste it in the product and then they'll become more interested. But it is a little bit of a, that's like a lot to ask for people who themselves are just like, I just want a loaf of bread, I just want to.
Although I will say, in this country, you're allowed to call something stone ground if it just touches a stone. So when I was a baker, a lot of the bakers I knew, they thought their flour was stone ground because it said stone ground on it. And but it didn't bother me because people could taste the difference that I was milling in house. And these are my baker friends, so I wasn't gonna burst their bubble. But when you start, those recognizable difference, just to have the opportunity to say to somebody when they taste it, oh my gosh, this is amazing, for them to hear, yeah, we milled it in house, I think is, because it does sort of, it's like an exclamation point when you're working with fresh flour. We get to the 45, right? Yes. Do we want to open this up for questions? Is there interest?
I'm all for questions. I want to say one thing. How many of the audience went or has been to the Asheville Bread Festival? Awesome. I have to say, Jennifer, you've done an amazing job of breeding an amazing culture down in Asheville. True story. So my wife and I, we were in Boone. We have friends in Asheville and Boone. So when the opportunity came up to go to the conference in April, my wife was like, yes, we'll go, and I'll take the day and see my friends. And then she had the opportunity to hang out with a bunch of us at the stone dressing conference and everything else. And on the way back, she was like, bread makers are so cool. They're so happy and willing to share. And I think that is also partly you. So I wanted to make sure to say thank you for doing that, because that's been inspiration for us up here. But I also would love to see us as an entity cultivate that more up here, but not just with bread makers, with chefs, with pasta makers, because I think a lot of that kitchen mentality is the opposite, which is that terror-based, like, oh, if I share this recipe with you, you're going to open up next doors to me, take my recipes, and then knock me out. And the opposite is the truth with what we're doing. So.
Yeah. Do we want to? Yeah, you got it.
Testing.
Evrim, I think you said we're all working towards the same mission or the same vision. Can you? So. Well, I'm wondering if you can articulate that.
Whoa. All right, on the count of 3. Yeah, it was one of the things I talked about with Jennifer. I mean, no is like the shortest answer I can give you. I don't think I can, because I believe it's a moving target right now. I think it's really dynamic and alive. The kind of metaphor of a child is really apt. I think we know it's fully loaded. There's like a lot of character. There's a lot of, we know what we're going for, but we don't know what it's exactly going to look like, how it's going to express itself, how it's actually going to work, what it might look like. I really don't know. So I would say for me at least, it's like a vague movement in a certain direction. But I would say that the fruits of that should be, we'll know that we're going in the right direction towards a common vision when the fruits are apparent. Like the more you see people able to leave behind whatever it is, whether it's the ego or the business or the fear, whatever it is, insecurity, lack of access, all those things, if they're able to leave that and connect with others and do something that everybody's really excited about because we know it's good for people and the earth and that doesn't become just like a stock phrase, then I think we're moving towards the right thing. I think if you see, it's okay though for it to be confusing for a while, so I don't want to say, just because things look really confusing to me right now that we're not moving in the right direction. But yeah, I would love to hear what you guys have to say about that. Collaborative, cooperative mills and infrastructure is the most concrete thing that comes to my mind. Yeah.
I look at it as because all of us have our individual goals, but for me, it's kind of that do more, do better, do it together, right? So I want to do more, not necessarily like to sell more pasta. That's a pretty banal goal, but I want to do more, and I want to see more local grain come into the shed. I want to see, and not just Virginia, but the very north end of the regional, the Mid-Atlantic. I'd like to see more of it available. I'd like to see it more stable. I'd like to have more access to cold storage and better testing. The fact that we have to ship our grain to different universities and wait 7 to 10 days to get the results back is super frustrating, and it's actually a burden. I'd like to see, so do more, do it better. Like, I'd like to see more people growing more sustainably, but I also think doing it together, because like no one person, that's the great thing about Jennifer's backstory, is it's actually not just her, but it's a whole web of people that help bring this together. I'd like to see us do it together. Not necessarily like a oligopoly where we're like controlling the grain price in Virginia or something like that, but I'd like to see it together.
Well, and like Carolina Ground is a good example of like the what is it, the parts are, I'm going to forget this idiom, but regardless, we are made up of a bunch of bakers that, and so our whole is much greater than the individual parts. And we were able to do this with that idea of what if we all came together. I will say though, we send our grain to North Dakota grain inspectors, well actually Bucyrus, Ohio, to get tested for mycotoxins and such, because that's where Dr. Marshall had told me to go, and they're really quick, and I know it's out of state, but they're really nice. It's really funny because my lab tech's name is Moses. And so like every year I'm like calling up Moishe and I'm like, hey, can I buy the grain? It's so funny to me. I actually don't call him Moishe, but I want to. But anyway, so I just think it's really funny because he's like the one on the hill telling me whether or not we've got mycotoxins. But doing.
I'll add to that, in addition to everything that Gabriel and everyone said, for me it's an economic thing too. My goal is to see, an economy where farmers can get paid a fair price for their grain to incentivize them to keep growing and using sustainable practices. Mills can produce a product that then can be sold to the consumer at a price that's easy for them to say yes to. That it's not a novelty product anymore. I shouldn't say novelty. It's a premium product. Maybe that's a better word for it.
We're treated as a novelty. I mean, I've had people I've approached with the pasta and the flour, and they'll be like, they literally laughed in my face. They're like, you want me to pay this? I'm like, but this is, and they're like, I can't even, and I've honestly had farmers approach me and they're like, yeah, it's this much dollars per pound before shipping. And I have to kind of stifle a laugh because it's like, yeah, I can't do that. So there needs to be an efficiency there.
Can I make a...
I hesitate to get into the second.
I think we could take one more question if Fred doesn't have anything.
It's not so much a question as a comment. So one of the themes that has gone through this discussion today is the variability of the inputs that we are... Can you hear me? Okay. The variability of the grains that we're working with from year to year, from farmer to farmer, and so on and so forth. I want to point out, because I think a lot of people are unaware of it, if I could borrow this. CGA is doing something about this. We've produced this brochure on baking with mid-Atlantic grains, because a lot of things one can do to deal with this diversity of quality and product and so forth. The version on the website has been a little bit updated from this, but they're both available. I have made very successful bread with 7.5% protein. It's doable.
So the challenge with that is then we need to actually get that in Spanish. No joke. We need it. That document, as great as it is geared towards the 1%, the captain of the ship. We need to be able to hand that to the guys down in the boiler room who are just trying to get through the day, so that we can't depend on the captain literally to leave their office, walk down the stairs, and come down and teach the person. We need to be teaching the people in the engine room how to do that. So that's a great document, but we need it in Spanish. We need it like just stupefy it. Like, here it is, this is what you do. And so it's a great document. I'm not putting it down, but that is the challenge we face, because that's written for the type, I love it, but that's the type of audience where it's really high end. We need to be able to hand it off. I would need to be able to hand it off to somebody who doesn't care to hear what I have to say, trust me, or possibly even speak the same language that I speak.
Great input. And I love that each of you kind of are coming from a little bit of a different place, because this is how, so valuable. And if you weren't in the room to say it, thank you. I feel like we might have room for one more question. Do we? Do we have any other questions? Jay, I think they've already got the microphone.
You want to shout? Sure.
There we go. So, do you think that there's a realistic future in which the product that y'all and many of us in this room produce is no longer considered a premium product? That it's something that has become commonplace and broadly financially accessible? And is that even a thing we want?
I see that as a good future to strive for, right? I think that'd be a good thing. I have faith that we'll get there, with like the CGA being formed in different grain movements across the whole U.S. It seems to be more mainstream. You see new mills popping up all the time. I think that's very a hopeful thing to look at.
I think it will require very different thinking in terms of scale. I remember we used to have this conversation back when we were founding the CGA. What you can do on a very small scale starts to look very different when you're trying to feed millions of people. It doesn't discount what you should do for 100 people, but that is not I follow and look at people that inspire me towards that end. But I think that as the serious conversation about what that actually looks like will probably come in a different form with a lot of with more people working together. That's a pop out a little bit.
No, because I wanted to echo that sentiment, more people working together, because I had a farmer say to me, eventually you're going to get big, and then you'll treat, he was telling me about what happened with the tobacco. He's selling organic tobacco, and then to American Spirit, who sold and then sold and then sold, and now they're, it was just like this story of a business that treated the workers really well, and now, they've got plants in the greenhouse that the quotas have been cut. And so, and I'm like, no, I'm not gonna scale up and drop you or treat you like this is about building this here now. And I just feel like everyone is gonna look a little different. I see, and which I love that, that each there's various iterations of how this looks, but I think that the idea that we have to scale up to be successful is old school thinking. And there is definitely a value in efficiencies, but I had somebody from the big milling industry who come in as a consultant for me early on, nicest man, Mark Fowler, who I just learned passed away, and he thought what I was doing was real interesting. This was the very beginnings, and I reached out to him when I was moving into my new building, and all the vendors wanted me to size up my system because I was adding a second mill. Okay, now make this big pneumatic system, and I didn't know, I didn't feel right. This Venturi big bag house and this and that. I didn't know enough about it, but my gut kept telling me I don't know if this is what I want to do. And it was Mark Fowler from the big milling industry, and he was like, "Don't do it. You're a boutique mill. Have two separate systems. Do this." And it was like it gave me permission to stay small and be okay with that. So. I don't know. I feel like it's going to unfold hopefully in the most creative way in a variety of different iterations that serve our communities.
Broaden it and keep it at human scale.
Thank you.
Yes. I think if you follow your question strictly, you're talking about commodification, which we're all kind of in our own way here to be against. You know, to make what we do accessible to every single person requires a scale that puts the grain at a cheap price. Like, there's a reason why this industrialization has happened in some respects. It's a nature of the system. So I think the answer is the more important question is, do we want it? So it needs to be at a human scale. I think there are definitely things that can be done to make things more efficient, more scalable. But I don't want my pasta company, never have I wanted my pasta company to be the next Barilla. And I don't want what we're doing with flour to be the next General Mills. You know, I think there's a universe of space between where I stand today and that point in time.
Well, I think it's time that we wrap up. I want to thank all of our panelists. This is great.